It's welcome to a big night tonight. We have welcoming back for the third time, Ray McKenna. And we're having the drawing for the Luck of the Irish raffle at the end of this big night. Someone's going to drive away with a car or maybe a tricycle. But big night. I'm standing in for Deanna tonight. I'm Mike Slane. I know most of you out there. Deanna's in California with her family, but she's here by Zoom. And we have lots of thanks. I have some notes here tonight because there are so many quick messages. We are very thankful tonight for our sponsors of this lecture, the Ladies Hibernian, under Catherine Brady. Would the ladies stand, please? Lady Hibernian, stand. Yeah. Thanks to all of you. And I'd like to thank the audience. We have about 170 people tonight between those seated here and the people on Zoom. And I have to thank Kathy Papp and her team for the great fundraising effort over the past many months. Proof. The Parade Week docents who survived the parade and are here with us tonight. Many of them, thank you so much for your contributions to Parade Week. And we're spreading our wings and getting the message out to more and more people. And I say we, it's with the help of our lecturers that we have tonight, as well as in the past. Steve Marino last night gave a rousing presentation to the Quindicum group on the Great Cutter Race of 1905. It was terrific. And our own Dr. John Quinn in the back there, I saw him earlier, is speaking on the rise of the Irish in 19th century Newport at Hibernians on the 26th of March. There is no charge, but it does require registering, and you can look up the VFW 406 Rhode Island, VFW 406 Rhode Island, and it'll give you the information. And competing with him that night, Dr. Scott Malloy in the front row here at Providence College, always entertaining. That's also free with a reception. And you can look that up under Providence College Murphy Healy Lecture. If you Google that, that will pop up. Now, tonight, we're very pleased to have with us Ray McKenna. Third time he's been with us. He was here in 2017, 2022, and then again with us tonight. He talked earlier about Providence, the Little Ulster Urban Industrial Complex. In 2022, he did a deep dive into chain migration. And then tonight, he's going to open the books on the Rhode Island U.S. Old Stone Bank, and the windows that opened into the Irish in Providence area. He's really I gotta say, you're a Renaissance man. He was educated, earned his history degrees at URI and the University of Connecticut. He taught European, Russian, and American history for 11 years, and then did something that we all want to do. He got into the wine trade, saw the light. And he's the author of an upcoming book called Embracing Hope, The Famine Irish Experience in Providence. Coming out soon, you can probably say more about that. But Ray, welcome back, please. Great. Good to have you.
Got a wet hand.
Okay, there you go.
Well, good afternoon or good evening, depending on your perspective. I am so excited to be here. I started a little project 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, trying to find out about my family. My mom said, we're mutts. Oh yeah, we've got Irish, but we're mutts. So, what's that mean? I don't know if, did any of you, were you told when you were little that you were mutts? It was kind of a way of, yeah, it was a way of deflecting the prejudice against the Irish. Anyway, as I tried to find out about my family, an Irish family, spent years and years doing it and learning about their community and going from there. I learned that I was less of a mutt than I am a representative of 8 counties: Sligo, Mayo, Roscommon, Galway, Monaghan, Derry, Antrim, and Armagh. And who knows, maybe I'll find some more. But tonight I'm going to talk about something that's really exciting. I tend to think of, there's this dichotomy between historians and genealogists. And historians traditionally are like, we don't deal with that. Oh, let me. Yeah, historically, historians would say, well, genealogists are just kind of looking for their family. But what's evolved since the internet has been able to expose so much information is that looking at families is another approach to looking at history. And so tonight I'm going to talk about what I think is the most exciting document for Irish history in Rhode Island in existence, and that's the Old Stone Bank records. They start in 1844 and they go through 1897. Now, in preparation for that, those of you who have tried to do research either for family or just for history have come up across this issue. Now, in the 1838 Providence Directory, at which time there were something like 1,500 Irish in the state, and that was it. The editor of the directory wrote down that the Irish are totally unable to either pronounce their names intelligently or spell correctly their names. A real slap. But you can imagine people were going in, some didn't speak English, some only spoke English when they were talking to somebody who had power over them. They were Irish speaking. And even after that, their accents hung around. So when we go looking for information historically, it's a lot of work. There's a lot of mistakes. So I use from the 1838 directory, these are the McKennas that were listed there. There's 4 different spellings, okay? And you can look at it as 4 different pronunciations. They missed one because in other years they included McKenny, and McKenny is another form of McKenna. So it's a problem. So when traditionally, if you look to find out about your family or you wanted to find out about chain migrations or where people came from, you had things like this is one of my great-great-grandfather's naturalization papers. And if you put down where you were born, that's great. He put down he was born in Ireland. That did no good. So sometimes you could find them, and they do exist, saying they come from Armagh, they come from Tipperary, but it doesn't include any women because women weren't citizens back in the 19th century, so very, very seldom did they get naturalized. So we're up against some problems here. The other thing we can do, this is in St. Pat's on Douglas Avenue in Providence, you can go into the famine Irish cemeteries, and what people would do if they had the money, a lot of them didn't have the money for a stone, but if they had the money for the stone, they put down where they're born. This fellow, James McKenna, I have no idea if he's a relative. There's so many McKennas, but he was born in the parish of Clara in County Tyrone. And the other ones indicate where they were from. Margaret McGeer, who is also so happened to be a McKenna, she's from County Tyrone. These are the little straws that you work with until recently. About 3, maybe 4 years ago, I discovered that the Boston Pilot on the BC website could give me information on when they were collecting money for the new Catholic college in Dublin in the 1850s, 1854, and also for the repeal movement. So they would have these massive meetings. People would come in, they'd give, you can see some people give $2. The priests like to show off, like John Corey liked to show off, and he gave $10. Well, I don't think it came out of his pocket. I don't know. But, we lost our, but then you could give as little as 25 cents and your name was there and they would say what county you came from. So, I mean, that was a breakthrough. That was like maybe 4 years ago I discovered this stuff. And then there's the Old Stone Bank. Now, in 1819, the Old Stone Bank opened up. It was the second bank of its type. It wasn't interested in bringing in millionaires, so they could come, they could put their money in. But it said, you know, we have so many people working in factories. If we can collect 5 cents or 10 cents from them a week, we'll have some real money. And so for the first time, there was a bank where the common working slob could go and he could make some, he or she could deposit their money and start to save money. And so in the early years, they write down a little bit of information, but by 1850, 1860, when the population is getting so large, not to mention the outer villages, they started to collect more and more information. Now, I knew about the records because somewhere around 1999, I was at the library, the Rhode Island Historical Society Library on Hope Street, and I met a guy named Ed Dugan. And he was an old guy. I think now that he was probably 10 years younger than me, but I thought of him as an old guy in 1999. And he had dug into, he was like the first person to dig into these records. Just backing up for a second, when the bank closed, it offered the records to Rhode Island Historical Society, and they brought them in and they put them upstairs, and they're still up there. He started going through it. Now, we're talking 11,000 pages. We're talking about more than 500,000 records. So I started going through this stuff, but that's a lot of time. And plus you have to decipher what was written. If they were literate, which most of them weren't in the early years, you had to deal with how they wrote because it wasn't always so good. And if it was written down by the bank clerk, then he was saying what he thought he heard. So now you have to weigh that. Well, I was spending time getting inside Rhode Island Historical Society's head about this whole thing. And there's a fellow there, Rick Ring. If you haven't met him, you should take a ride out. He's the most wonderful man you can imagine. And it was not my idea. It was a colleague or a friend who recommended that I try to put Rhode Island Historical Society in contact with the New England Historical and Genealogical Society. They're up on Newbury Street. If you're ever there, it's a beautiful building and they have great artwork and great collections inside. And so we had a meeting in Boston. They decided that they would, in fact, scan. They have great scanning material, scanning machines, much better than Rhode Island Historical Societies, which are very, very good. And they said, we'll do the whole thing. We'll scan it all if we can have it on our website. And Rick said, that's great, but there can be no wall. There can be no money wall. Anybody, anywhere in the world has to be able to access this anytime. So if you want to use their website, for most of the material they have on their website, you have to become a member. But for the New England Historical, for the Old Stone Bank records, they're there. Now, what do the bank records tell us? There are, as you can see, there are 29 volumes. There's 11,000 pages. 832,000, I didn't count them, the people up in Boston counted them, 832,000 people whose names are mentioned. So there can be a record, but it can include the husband and the wife, husband and the children, a cousin, a sibling. And so if you're trying to figure out what's going on, it's fantastic. There's also 42 so far. Now we've gone through 1844 to 1882, 1881. And we have all those pages done. We have them transcribed. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But we still have 17 more 16 more years to go through. We have a lot, got another 15,000 Irish names or 20,000 Irish names to come up with. But in the meantime, 42 countries or territories are represented by the people that open accounts. It's extraordinary. Now, for the sake of those of us who are Irish Americans, we dominate because among the workers in the city, and not just the city, but this includes people as far south. Occasionally, there's Newport people, but people in Bristol, people in Barrington, in Warren, Fall River, New Bedford, Eastern Connecticut, towns north of Attleboro. There were, you know, the trains had access, and I think the bankers also knew how to go to the factories and sign people up and collect the money, and they could have it sent down to them. So anyway, so we have all those records, and now we can look at it. And they're remarkable stories. They're stories of sailing from Ireland. If you want to figure out how your family paid for it, I think I've figured out how my McKennas, not my McKennas, how my Dugans married the McKennas right away. How they got here. I think I've figured it out because a great-great-grandmother became a domestic servant, and while her older brother and her father were here and they were working as laborers, they couldn't save as much money because they had to pay their own room and board. She had room and board free. So 2 years after she comes, the rest of the family comes over. So if you want to figure that stuff out, or what's really kind of interesting too is how many people went back to Ireland? We don't think about that, but a lot of people were really unhappy here and they went back to Ireland. How did they do it? I found people who, two sisters will open a bank account together, and one of them says she's going back to Ireland. So the two sisters are opening the account. When the woman gets back to Ireland, it's very easy to transfer the money. It's very great thing. Two brothers, one of them two brothers named Sullivan from Cork. They're all from Cork and Kerry. Believe me, believe me. So these two brothers, one of them lives in Cork and one of them lives in Providence, and they open a bank account together. Now, there's so many stories that can come out of this. And I'm going to tell you some tonight, but I can't do all the stories. Like, was he taking care of his brother in Cork, or was this a prelude to him coming over to America? And these stories can be found out, and I'll give you some examples in a minute. Oh, incidentally, you find things like, because people were going west, it was the time of the gold rush and all that kind of stuff. James Kern from County Waterford went west to California, and he came back and he walked into the Old Stone Bank carrying a bag of gold. Now, that story could be followed through. I haven't done it, but people could find out, like, did he become really rich? What happened with the bag of gold? These stories they grow and grow and grow. John Carroll from County Roscommon wrote down that he was fighting Indians in the West, and now he's back. And then you have personal descriptions. And the first personal description that I think I came across in the Old Stone Bank was in 1861. People were like, this is serious banking, we're not going to write this stuff down. And this young guy in his 20s, who was the clerk, writes down that Bridget Moran has red hair and light eyes. Now, nobody else is getting description. This guy is smitten. Okay. And also, for many of us, I know in my family, a lot of people didn't come to America first. They went to England or Scotland, and then maybe a generation later they came. You can find this. I found a woman named Ann Cooney from Roscommon. She opens an account with her daughter, who was born in Lancashire in England. So now you're all of a sudden beginning to see the movements, not just from County Roscommon to Providence or to Newport, but the circuitous routes. Okay. I found somebody yesterday who ran off with a circus. Now that's a story too. So I've got, most of my family came during the famine. And they didn't tell their kids about the terrible times they went through, or if they did, somehow it never didn't get down to me. And so there are two people like Edward Fanning married a woman named Honora Mullen. And 30 years ago, I found their marriage certificate. I don't know how I did. I found it in Sutton, Mass. How I ended up going to Sutton, Mass to find this document. But after that, I could find nothing about him. He went down one time to become a citizen of the United States. There were 19 Irish guys that got citizenship that day. 18 of them wrote down the county they were born in. Not Edward Fanning. He just put down Ireland. Now, maybe for some people it doesn't matter, but once you realize where somebody comes from, you can start to dig into things like birth records in Ireland. You can start to find out maybe the specific reasons why people left. You know, we all say they left because of famine. Well, some in Roscommon, a lot of them left because a guy like Major Dennis Mahan went around knocking down houses and throwing people out and giving them a little bit of money to get on a ship that didn't have any food in it. A notorious guy. And some of those people end up in Providence. A lot of them do. Anyway, the picture on the left, on the right, is their daughter, Anne Fanning. She married my great-grandfather. This was my dad's grandmother. And she died in birth. She died having the second child. So I have her picture, beautiful young lady, but I didn't know anything about them. But then I go to the New England Historical and Genealogical Society, and there it is. So I open up the page, and up there, Edward Fanning was born in Roscommon, and Honora Fanning Mullen was born in Galway. It's them. And now, there's a lot of stuff you can find online. So here are all the Mullins on the left-hand side in Galway, and Fannings in Roscommon. I'm going to have an easier time finding the famine ancestors, but if I can get a hold of, I have the names of their parents. So I haven't had a chance to dig, but I could dig and probably, maybe I can get down to the village or the farm. It's crazy stuff. It's coming out of this old stone bank. It's an extraordinary, extraordinary thing. The woman on the right was another great-great-grandmother. Her name is Mary Hoban, very poor. She was illiterate, hence the X. She opens an account in 1850. Shortly thereafter, she's married. And then she opens another account and puts down that she's born in Mayo. Oh, this is starting to, get closer. And that she's married to Barney McLaughlin. Well, they get separated, and that's a whole terrible story that I can tell you some other day. So Barney opens up an account, and he says he's born in Derry. He was one of those dudes that, he was the one back there, the one that I showed you the naturalization record. Everything's filled up, but he doesn't put down where he's born. Well, he did right here. The bank wanted him. So next time you come in and they say, Mr. McLaughlin, I want to know who you are. Well, I was born in Galway. I was born in, he won't get his money. I was born in Derry. And then you go down a little further, and just before she died in 1895, she opened a new account, and she put down her father and her mother's names, including her mother's maiden name. Wow, I mean, I might get down to a farm. I've done it twice. I've walked farmland where my ancestors left in the 1840s. And truly, I mean, I like to find out these things about my family, but what I really want to do is I want to understand the Irish famine generation, and that's what I'm working on. So you can use the New England Historical and Genealogical Society, but you also need to go to Federal Hill Irish. That's me. Because I have this group. The reason we got Rhode Island Historical Society interested in doing this whole project was that I got a group of close to 20 people, and we began to transcribe everything, everybody from everywhere, the Germans, Jews from Eastern Europe. It was like, it gets harder and harder when they start, writing in Yiddish. But, whoops, where did we go? But anyway, and then once it got when it was all put up online with New England Historical, the American Ancestors website. I'm gonna stop saying New England Historical and Genealogical Society. Anyway, when they put it up online, then there was no point for us to transcribe everything, but there's a very good reason for us to keep transcribing the Irish, because we're building a huge story out of that. Also, in New England, what they do is they'll guess at a name. They transcribed 11,000 pages in a very short period of time, and they all with volunteers. Hey, I use volunteers for my project. But they didn't necessarily know names that were typical in Rhode Island. And they also sometimes they didn't cross-reference. They tried to, but there are so many mistakes. Now, I have mistakes in my project, but far fewer mistakes, because we go to no end to find out how these names come out. So you come to my website, and on the cover page, you're going to see this thing, and it says search records. You're going to search them, and you're going to see spreadsheets like this. Now, I've got the arrow down at the bottom because 1878, that's this year. What I break them out in the early years. I could do several years because there's not a lot of material. Later on, I'm doing it year by year by year. And you can copy this, and then you can cross-reference. You can find all the people that went to work with your ancestor, all the people that came from County Tyrone, all the people that worked as domestic servants. There's a lot of material. Also, and we'll talk about domestic servants. We have a lot of women that are signed up, and we know who they worked for. And that's a big difference too, because you can dig into that and you can find out if they're working for good families or bad families. Anyway, this is what we've got so far, okay, through 1881. We've got almost 25,000 records of people saying where they're born. It's extraordinary. And you can look and you can see there are several big chains. Those of you who heard me talk in the past know that there's this chain that came out of Tyrone and Monaghan, right at the confluence of the two counties. It's huge, but there's also one that came out of Roscommon and one that came out of Leitrim. And because they're adjacent to each other, it's entirely possible that they were part of one chain. And then after that, the biggest group coming out is coming from Cork, but Cork was 10 times the size of some of these places. It was three times the size of Tyrone's population, 5 times of Leitrim's population. So 10% of the people living at the time of the famine lived in Cork. So was it a chain? It's a chain of sorts, but it's these other ones that are pretty fascinating. And for whatever reason, I don't know what it is with Wicklow people, but they didn't want to come to Rhode Island. It's a small place. I got 1,859 surnames. I didn't know there were that many surnames in Ireland. It's possible that some of them are the same because of the spelling, but we try to keep those broken out as well. It's close to that number. 1,348 maiden names. These are women that you would not know where they were born. Had no idea. You'd guess maybe it was where the husband was born. Don't know. It's in the records. So domestic workers, over 3,000 women are putting down where they're born and who they worked for. And sometimes there's other information as well. This is very, very useful. One of the things that I'm hoping that historians will take this material and build out volumes on it. For example, someone could write a whole book on 19th century Irish domestic servants. You've got this to start with. And I break these down into counties as well. It's amazing. And then some of the stories are just, well, pretty incredible. Child labor. A guy like Billy Patton goes in, he's 12 years old, or Bill Slattery's 11, and they open their own bank accounts. And no one's saying, hey, kid, what are you doing that for? Why are you working 8 hours or 10 hours a day? Why aren't you in school? They're not saying that. They're just recording it because it was the norm. Pretty awful stuff. Now, this is amazing. These are 400 names that when you linked it with a county can take you to the parish And closer than that can take you into the townland, and in many cases, take you right to the farm. And I've followed these through. I have some really good sources that I'm able to use that have expertise in this stuff. And so I've been able to follow this through. I'm very careful of it to make sure that the chances are very, very good they're going to get close to the farm. I mean, wouldn't it be cool if your ancestor was in northern Rhode Island and you're able to find out what farm they were on? I've walked the land of my great grandfather in County Monaghan, the Dugans. I've walked his farm, and I've walked the farm of his now a cousin, a third great grandfather in County Roscommon, and it's hard to find. So in the past, I've talked to you about chain migrations, and I talked to you about the big chain coming out of Monaghan and Tyrone. You can see how it's one. More people came out of Tyrone, but really the heart of the whole place is in this place called Errigal True up in the north of Monaghan. This fellow over here, Cormac O'Holland, his brother came to Providence. He had relatives in Rhode Island. In my research, I came across a lot of information. I've been able to get in contact with, this picture was taken around 1910 in just outside of the town of Oha in County Tyrone, which is, and yeah, a number of his family members came to Rhode Island. His brother was in charge of an estate where he was the guy who kept the poachers out, and he poached a deer. His family was hungry, and he had to leave it during the night. He had to slip away, and he had relatives in Providence, and that's why he went there. There's the connections that you can make with the old country is incredible. So here are these two guys, the father and his son. The father is Owen Hamill, and the son is Thomas, and they go in to open up a joint account. And Thomas, the younger guy, says he's a marble polisher at Tingley Manufacturing Company, and he's born in County Tyrone. Well, that's good. It's County Tyrone. And Tingley's interested because Tingley employed he was a Yankee, but he employed a lot of Irish. In fact, Tingley even married an Irish girl. And he was very, very much supported. If you go into St. Pat's, and probably the same in St. Francis, and maybe St. Anne's, and maybe I bet over here too. If you look, they often sign their name at the bottom of the stone. You know, they wanted you to know what company did it. And there are Tingleys all through St. Pat's. So they were getting business from the Irish, but they were also employing the Irish and even marrying them. So, but the father puts down he's from Donadara and Oha in County Tyrone. Well, this is an 1855-56 map of, there's his farm, number 8. I was able to go back to the actual farm. And because I've got connections over there, a fellow that I know, not very well, but I know him. He said, I'll go over and I'll see if the farmhouse is still there. So he takes his camera, and that's the farmhouse. And he goes, it's abandoned, and he does a lot of measurements and stuff. And he says, based on everything I can see, this is a pre-famine house. This house is, there's some of us who get crazy about things like architecture and want to know when something was built. And he's saying that's likely Hamill's house. And my friend Donna also has a drone. That's the farm. So I find this one entrance in the Old Stone Bank record, and there's his farm, and there's his house. Now, it wasn't just the little people, although many of them started out as little people. This guy named Gilbane, Bill Gilbane, he opens a bank account. He's a carpenter. He's 24 years old, and he opens up a bank account so he can start to keep track of his money. He wants to build a strong business. I think he succeeded. So, and you find this, he was poor. He came from a poor family. Now, I'm quite sure none of you have heard of this guy, Bannigan. You haven't heard of him, have you, Scotty? No. So we all know that Joseph Bannigan, thanks to Scott Malloy's great book on the Bannigans and their workers. He came from County Monaghan. He came as a very little boy. He was born, I think, just 4 years before the famine. So he came as a tiny little kid. And here, it doesn't seem like he ever opened an account. But the top thing, that's his dad, Bernie, or Barney, and his mother, Alice. And Barney is a day laborer. He's going down to the corner and see if he can get a job every day. His son becomes the first Irish millionaire in Rhode Island. And other connections. I write to Scott every time I come across another one of his relatives opening a bank account. So here are siblings of his opening bank accounts. One works as a domestic servant. None of them have money, but along the way, Joseph certainly does. Now, it's not just Irish. I'm going to tell you a little story. Every once in a while, I'll come across something and I stop what I'm doing because the transcribing, like, I want to finish it like before I'm 100, you know, and it takes a while. But every once in a while, I come across a story, or I see something that pulls me in. And this woman, Bethany Vini, she was born in Virginia. And what got me, you can see the words over on the bottom on the right-hand side, formerly a slave. So I go, wow, maybe there's a story here. So I start digging into her story. A businessman from Rhode Island went down to Virginia to do some work. He was doing surveying or something. I don't remember exactly, but it's in my book if you want to find out. But anyway, he needs help. And the guy, his friend down there, who I think he was staying with, says, well, why don't you use one of my slaves to help you out with your work? Bethany's good, she can help you out. Well, this guy is so impressed with her that when he's ready to come back to Rhode Island, he buys her. He brings her up to Rhode Island. He frees her, gives her independence, and then he takes her down to the Old Stone Bank to open an account, and he teaches her banking. He teaches her how to make money so she'll be on her own. I found all this stuff out because it started with this formerly a slave. So what she did is she was selling women's cosmetics door to door. And then she started putting her money into real estate. She moved up to Worcester and she started buying houses. And also when the war came to an end, the Civil War came to an end, she started to go down and find relatives and bring them up. She found 18 of her relatives and brought them up to Worcester and had housing for them. This is what's in the Old Stone Bank. All of that's not in the Old Stone Bank, but you start with 3 words and a story comes out of it. The Civil War is full of stories. We've got 1,500, more than 1,500 records of people involved in the Civil War. And I'll tell you just about 3 of them. There are 3 parents. The first one was Mary Baggett. She was married to Jeremiah Baggett. Does anybody know that name, Jeremiah Baggett? Okay. He was on everybody's lips back in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, even the 1860s. He was one of the leaders of the Irish community. In 1839, for the first, now, Anne straightened me out that the first parade in Rhode Island took place in Newport in 1842. But the first celebration of St. Patrick's Day took place in 1839 in Providence. And Jeremiah was one of the speakers. He was probably put up a lot of the money for it. He was a very smart businessman. He also was instrumental in working behind the scenes for the Dorr Rebellion. He was a witness for the defense in the Gordon trial. And he also worked to reunite families, whether it was bringing people from Ireland to America or helping people go back to Ireland. He was an amazing man. an extraordinary man. Well, his wife, Mary, and incidentally, they used to live down there where the cathedral is. It was the old cathedral then, but then they moved up to Providence. She was from I think she was from County Tyrone, and there was a lot of people. I mean, up to Federal Hill. There were a lot of people living on the hill from Tyrone. So they bought a place next to what's that bakery? The Italian bakery that's right up. You know, yeah, there's a parking lot right next to it. Just before you get there, that's where their house was. Anyway, so she gets in a carriage and goes down to on a beautiful day. Actually, if I was doing this talk in 2 days, it would be exactly 161 years. It was on the 21st of March. Hey. And so she goes down and she opens up an account. She has a son named John. He's in the military. And they're now very hopeful. This is after Gettysburg, and they're very hopeful that the tide is turning and that the war is going to come to an end. All of the parents worried constantly, particularly the mothers, I'm quite sure, over the fact that their young sons were off fighting a war, because a week didn't go by without somebody in a neighborhood finding out that their child was dead. It was constantly finding out children were dead, or they were coming home with missing limbs. People were, you can imagine how afraid they were. And so it looked optimistic. So she went down and opened up an account for him so that when he came back, he would have something to work for. He was in North Carolina at the time. He did come back unscathed. He married, he had 4 children. And like his dad, he was a leader in the community. And at least one of their children, also named Jeremiah Baggett, I believe was a religious leader in the Newport area. And I should have looked at that again before I came over. I'm quite sure he was in Newport. I don't know if he was Catholic or what he was. Jeremiah was a Catholic. He was put up a lot of money for the. On one of the things he did on Broadway, where St. Mary's Church is, Jeremiah went and bought that land so that they would have a place for a cemetery. There was no cemetery for the Irish. There were a lot of them. There were, a couple of thousand people living here at the time. They ended up instead using St. Pat's out on Douglas, and then that piece of land went to St. Mary's. But that's one of the things he did. Anyway, so that story works out very nicely. John comes back and is successful. There's another woman also up on Federal Hill living on Acorn Street named Catherine Dennis. And she's 60 years old. She's a widow. Her son, Bill, is off fighting in the war. She goes and open up a bank account, but to share with them. But she also buys a piece of property right at the corner of Atwells Avenue and America Street, so very close to DePasquale Square and all that stuff. I mean, right in the heart of the community. She buys a piece of land. She's thinking, Billy's going to be home soon. He's going to marry. He's going to have children. I'm going to be the nana who's taking care of them. I'm going to have my family all complete. 10 days after she opens the account, he's killed in Spotsylvania, murdered on the field of battle. She's a wreck. She loses the piece of property because she's not going to develop it. She ends up living in a room on Acorn Street, and she doesn't have a lot of money left. And then when she finally dies, she gives it all to the priest at St. John's on Atwells Avenue. Really tragic story. And then there's Daniel and Margaret Cronin. They fled in 1846, the first season you could sail after the famine hit. It hit in the fall of 45. You didn't sail in the winter because of the ice. And so they leave in the spring of 1846 with their 2-year-old son, Dennis. So Dennis becomes a teenager, the war breaks out, and he joins. And so now Daniel is hopeful that he'll survive. It does turn out that he survives. Margaret, with their 4th child, dies in childbirth. And so Daniel raises the three kids that survive. And Daniel, who started out as a day laborer, becomes a skilled stonemason. And then his son Dennis becomes a skilled mason. The kid that came as a 2-year-old. All of these kinds of stories, there's a gazillion. Rhode Island is very well known as the first state that sent a black regiment, white officers, but a black regiment in the American Revolution. It also was the first one to send a black regiment in the Civil War. The 14th Rhode Island Heavy Artillery, colored, is what it was called. And they enlisted, and they wanted, like, just like the Irish, they wanted to be accepted. If they thought, if they fight for my country, when I come back, people will accept me, or they'll respect me. Well, they sent them down to the swamplands of Louisiana, and they didn't pay them. And so the guys were getting disgruntled. And but try not to cause trouble. You're in the military, you're not going to shoot your officer. I mean, maybe eventually, but not, you want to work things out. And so they eventually negotiate a much smaller amount of money. And when it's sent to their wives, the wives all walk down the street within a couple of days of each other, and they open bank accounts. Now, I've got a story on my blog, Federal Hill Irish, about the families. Because now that you see these families coming down together, you begin to see that they have, that you begin to see that they have relationships with each other. So after the war, a lot of them are living in Oneyville. They live in the same flats. Sometimes they live in the same apartment. The amount of material that comes out of this, just mind-boggling. This fellow, Aaron Ginsberg, walks into the bank. That's his signature. I have a friend in DC who is an expert in Hebrew, and he couldn't make out exactly what that was, but that's what the guy wrote down. He was a peddler, and he came from Kovno in Russia. Well, Kovno is actually in Lithuania, and Kovno was going through pogroms. And so he came to escape the pogroms. In World War II, Kovno was overrun first by the Germans, then by the Russians. 10% of the 200,000, I think it was 200,000 Jews who lived in that city, survived. I think 200 survived, or something like that. 2,000. No, it was a disaster. Anyway, so, and these pictures, these come from courtesy of Scott Malloy, who has, if you Google Scott Malloy's URI library, you can get all these clippings, newspaper clippings. And these are views from Providence Journal in the 1890s. They wrote about these guys as being so exotic. And then they also wrote about the Chinese. This is the same group of newspaper articles. And this guy, Hawa, this is his name, he wrote up there, and he opens up a dry cleaning service. It's interesting how certain ethnic groups had the same kind of jobs going on and on and on. So I did a little bit of looking at him. He was in the north end of Providence, and there were three other companies, three other Chinese guys they competed with. Now, let me make sure I'm doing all right. Ooh, boy, it's running out. I'm going to tell you very quickly about these Italians, because my interest in Federal Hill is strong. I had 4 generations living there. And in the 1860s, 1850s, 5 brothers showed up, and they show up in Federal Hill. They live around the corner from my family. And the first one just puts down that he's a fresco painter. Then they put down that they're born in Tuscany. And finally, they put down they're born in Lucca. And then a woman comes from the family and says, no, we're from Barga. Barga's just outside of Lucca. Ooh, they're fresco painters. What are they doing there? There's an Irish guy named Murphy who's opened up an architectural firm in the city. He's from New York. He's building all the churches around. He needs fresco painters. Where do you go? Go to Tuscany. So That's the neighborhood that we're living in, this 1890s. That's Spruce Street. So they come from up in this area. See Toscana, see the Rondo, just north of there, you see Varga, just north of Lucca. And so I was really curious about this place. So what do you do if you're really curious about this stuff? Well, I went to Varga. I confess, I'm nuts. I'm completely nuts. Actually, I love Italy. I love Italy. I'm going to be in Italy in 2 weeks. But my wife and I were planning to go to Lucca. And I said, well, Varga is only just outside of town. It's a hill town. I wanted to see, because I love art, I wanted to see what inspired these men to create the art they did. Here is some of the medieval works that you can find if you go to Varga and to Lucca, which is just down the hill. You begin to see a transition into the Renaissance. It's just showing up. If you look at the hands, it's still very medieval, but the faces are beginning to show expression. And Tuscany was the heart of the Renaissance. These men studied there. So what do? I go to St. Mary's on Broadway, because they were doing frescoes for did I say McCarthy? Get an Irish name mixed up. Murphy. They're doing frescoes for him. He builds this church. I think they usually didn't sign their names. This fresco in there could very well have been by the Redina brothers. Anyway, so here we are. Now it's your turn. Where will the old stone bank take you? If you live in Newport, you may feel like it's not going to be your bank, but I'll bet over the generations, somebody from Warren or Barrington or maybe far away in East Greenwich married somebody and your family, and these records are there. And the stories, I just showed you a couple of examples or a few examples of stories, but the stories are here. It's amazing. Now, I've talked too long. Anne's going to yell at me, but I'm going to ask you, would you have any, and say, Anne's waving, go away, Ray, go away. Does anybody have questions for me? Yes.
Irish family. Oh, sorry. Yeah, my family is actually from Federal Hill, Irish family, Baxter Quinn. So, what I'm curious about is, we're always told that, oh, we were the last Irish family to leave the hill, you know? And I think everybody is the last Irish family to leave the hill. So, right about when was that turn? Because Federal Hill is a very transient community.
Very.
It's an immigrant community, and so I'm curious as to when the transition happened.
It's a very good question, and this is one of the things that the Old Stone Bank is giving us. If you didn't hear, she's asking when the transition from Irish to Italian took place. The Irish were living up there as early as 1827, but only on the hill going up to Federal Hill, kind of where the highway is now. By the 1850s, it was a really thickly settled, almost all Irish neighborhood with a lot of people from counties Tyrone and Monaghan. The Redina brothers come in the 1850s, and they're among the first people coming in. The early Italians coming in are mostly coming from the north. Later on, they'll come from the south, from Sicily and from Basilicata and all the other places down in the south. But in the early years, they're coming from the north. And they also started coming after the revolutions of 1848. Revolutions broke out throughout Europe. They broke out in Italy, and a lot of people had to flee. Garibaldi, one of my great heroes, he fled to New York for a while. So there was one guy who fled to Federal Hill, and he used to entertain people. His wife had been an advisor of some sort to Garibaldi, and people would come and visit. This is in the 1860s or 1850s. You see in the Old Stone Bank records in the 1870s, the Italians start to drip in, drip, 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 drip. We get into the 1880s, and they're coming in bigger and bigger numbers. The 1890s is when they come in such huge numbers, and then they keep coming all the way until 1922 or 3 or 4, when they close the door and say no more people from Eastern Europe. or Southern Europe. So the transition, the big transition's happening in the 1880s. But I have met people who 20 years ago were still Irish families that lived on Federal Hill. So people hung around for a long time. My grandmother lived on Federal Hill probably in the 1960s. So they were still, yeah, shaking your head, yeah. Other questions? Yes. Yes.
Do you know anything about the Old Stone Bank that was here in Newport, which must have been a branch of this one?
It was a branch.
And when was it? I know it left, well, the bank building. It looks something like the building that was here in 1973, when they reconstructed America's Cup Avenue and stuff. That's when it disappeared. And there was another branch here in town on William Street, I think. So do you know if there's records in Newport, like at the Newport Historical Society, like this from the Old Stone Bank, that branch that was here?
The bank records that we have, the only ones that we know exist are the ones that came out of Providence, but they were all branches. And then the bank was, people loved it. People like my dad got screwed when the bank went under. Probably a lot of people, got in trouble when it went under. And the records that we have are the ones from Providence. The later records, it got to a point where, incidentally, when I talk about 25,000 Irish records, I'm not talking about Irish Americans, just Irish. Their kids open bank accounts. So we're talking probably it could be 70,000 Irish people, or 75,000 Irish families that get mentioned in these records with specific stuff. Other questions? Yeah.
Do you have a feel why there were so many folks from Leitrim and Roscommon that ended up in Providence, relatively sparsely populated county?
Very, very much so. A big part of it had to do with with Dennis Mahan, the landowner who wanted to. He was basically English, and he wanted to make his land more profitable. So he arranged for 3 ships to take quite a few hundred people over to Canada, and reneged on some of the money that he promised he was going to put into food and so forth. And so by the time, and also they didn't check for disease before they got on the ships. And at least one of those ships lost something like 40% of its people. And they arrived at Grosse Isle and up in Quebec, and people were getting sick and dying there. It had a repercussion through the whole area. One of my ancestors, the picture you saw right in the beginning. What is this? Anyway, the picture you saw right in the beginning of the young man, the one that was in the advertisement, his father was living very close to where Dennis Mahan was assassinated. Dennis Mahan was coming home from Roscommon, and he had been at a meeting, and he was coming up through near Kilbride, and as the carriage turned the corner and he was driving it, 1 or 2 men shot him. And the repercussions after that, it happened all through Ireland. It was like it scared the living daylights out of the landowners, and they began to push people off. And I think that that's probably the biggest thing that drove people out of Roscommon. And it's a huge number. Even responsible, it's terrible things responsible for me and Scott being here. It's like, ay. His family comes from a few miles away from my family.
We have a question over here from John Quinn.
Hi, John Quinn.
Hi, this is really interesting.
Thank you.
You mentioned Jeremiah Baggett,
Yes.
and then you said that there would be a Newport connection. So I was just going to say that there was a Jeremiah Baggett who was pastor of St. Mary's from early 1920s to the 1930s. So I don't know if that's
He is the grandson.
okay. It's such an unusual name. I just figured that's got to
Yeah.
be the same family.
Yeah, originally from County Leitrim,
Okay. Good.
Habitstown. Yes. I see somebody with their hand up.
In the first row.
Hi,
Hi.
my great grandmother was from County Monaghan, so I was wondering, what kinds of sources do you know in County Monaghan? Once you trace them back from there to, from here to there, what are the best sources to see where their farms were or something like that?
Um, there are a number of sources. Probably the best thing to do would be to contact me. If you go to Federal Hill Irish, I can give you a lot of information. There's a historical society there for one thing. There are records through Ancestry that cover that. There are church records and very difficult to read. They don't begin until the 1830s or so. And so for me, finding records in Monaghan has been very tough. For example, my last name is McKenna, and the first McKenna that came over his name was Peter, and he married a woman named Dugan from Durnalosset, which is in Errigal True in Monaghan. I know where they come from. I've got a cousin there, for God's sake, for more like first person I met when I went to Ireland. I said to him, I'm looking for my McKennas. He said, forget it. Half of the people here are McKennas and married to McKennas. I said, well, I'm looking for my Dugans. And he goes, oh my God, my wife is a Dugan McKenna. And it turns out, and DNA has proved it, we're cousins. First person I met in Ireland. So you might want to go there because it's magic. But there are records, and probably if I were to give you all the information now, all these people would fall asleep.
My question is about where people embarked in Ireland from, where the ships came from, and which ports were most popular coming into this country for Irish.
It's a very good question. From the north, it was Liverpool, and actually from the east, you took a boat from Belfast or from Derry or from Dublin to Liverpool, and then from there you came to usually New York. New York is more popular than Boston, but people went into Boston, and people also went into Montreal. In the south, they went out of Cobb. And in the west, they would have gone out of Sligo. It's really hard to find those records. I've spent a lot of time looking for that stuff. I've seen more evidence on Liverpool. Yes. Do you have a question? Oh, sorry.
Since the Old Stone Bank, which I guess is really called the Providence Institution for Savings, was
It was.
was so proactive in attracting deposits from recent immigrants, my Irish family was in Worcester County, Massachusetts. My great grandfather was a station master for the Providence in Worcester. And so I'm curious whether there was a financial institution in that region that was as seminal, if I wanted to do that.
There are only two others I know of, and it's entirely possible that there's a bank there where there's records in the bottom of a building. And maybe they'll be found someday, but there is 2 or 3 years before the Providence Institution for Saving, which became nicknamed the Old Stone Bank and then became officially the Old Stone Bank. 3 years before that opened, there was the Provident Institution for Saving in Boston. And you can go to the New England Historical and Genealogical Society, and you can actually access those records. I've tried to work with them. I've found very little connection to Rhode Island there. But Worcester is a possibility. Yeah, I mean, all up and down the Blackstone River Valley. And also you may find some stuff from Worcester because there are people coming in from Millville and all these other places and opening accounts. Wherever the train went, an agent for the Old Stone Bank would go and collect money and bring it back for investments. If you ever find it, it would be great. The other one is the Immigrant Savings Bank in New York, and that material is great. I have one Scottish ancestor that I found there, and I found is so much information. Other questions? If you have difficulty with the Old Stone Bank records, or if you need any help digging into them, write to me. The easiest thing to do is go to federalhillirish.com, send me a note, and I can help you as best I can. because it's formidable. My stuff is easier, I think, easier to read than the New England Historical Society, but mine's not necessarily easy for a lot of people to read. And yeah, I'll be very happy to help. How many people have ancestors who are in Rhode Island 1850s, 1880s? Good chance you're going to find relatives. I found a number of Malloys, Roscommon Malloys. So even though I think your family came in the 1890s, Scott, but people came in chains. They came because someone came before them. And so there are Malloys from Roscommon who could have been the parents or aunts or uncles, or even grandparents of your family when they came in. Stealing sheep. It's a good business in sheep. You can make a sweater and you can also eat.
You're gonna help us with the drawing here? You want to pick
Sure.
up a couple numbers?
Yes.
Let me get around to the other side here.
Okay.
Okay, so what we've all been waiting for.
You
Salad,
want the mic?
salad or raffle, he's gonna do, you're gonna call me names.
I agree.
You're gonna call me
Good.
names.
Think again.
Oh, I did, yeah.
Again.
First, the third prize is $1,000.
Third price is $1,000.
Yeah, before folks leave, I just want to thank again the Lady Hibernians for their sponsorship tonight. And as the last in the series for this year, 24-25, I'd like to thank the crew that's responsible for putting this together. Ann May, Dan Titus, Rick O'Neill, John Quinn. Thanks to all of them.
Okay. This has nothing to do with the bribes I took initially.
Which one is this now? Which one are we picking up first?
The third.
Okay.
Is Lisa Finn here?
Lisa Finn.
She just sent that in today.
Wow. Is this on? Yes. Okay.
So Lisa Finn is not here.
That was Lisa Finn, interestingly enough, just sent it in today. And if you recall last year, May Hunnefeld was in the audience for the Cutter race. She bought one ticket and she was a winner.
So this is Joyce Fahey Londres. I spent time in France, so that's how I pronounce it. And Glenn Londres. Maybe Londres.
They won second prize, $2,000. Now, this is the first prize, grand prize.
And Scott, what's your last name? Is Mary Fournier here?
She is.
Wow. Nice. Very nice.
On behalf of the-
Yeah. We thank every one of you that participated in that. That fundraising is what keeps our lights on, pays the rent, and enables events such as this. So thanks so much to everyone.